Well, we are now live, and having done this a lot in many ways, it still makes my heart go, go. We're live, right? And I'm happily here with one of the more alive people I know, Ralph De La Rosa. I've known of you, Ralph, for quite some time. This is our first time live interacting with each other. So this is unrehearsed. And for better and for worse, I know you through mutual friends at Spirit Rock Meditation Center who just rave about you. And I know of you through your work with mindfulness as a therapist and really occupying a particular, I think, very important space of, there's a certain amount of let's all be nice and restrained and stiff in the self-help mindfulness world. And you are a refreshing breath of fresh air, blowing that pretentious, performative cobwebs out of the mind and the hall. And so I'm really glad to have a chance to talk about your new book with you, which is pretty awesome and feisty and fiery and wonderful, fierce and fearless. And because you don't give up, there's an F in there somewhere, I'm sure. No more F's to give. So anyway, I'm really glad we're having a chance to talk here for real, Ralph, in this weird and wild and wonderful and horrible, appalling time. So thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah, no, Rick, I would be amiss to say, I got to tell you something. I don't get starstruck very easily, especially in the Buddhist world. It's kind of antithetical to the whole thing, but your work has really impacted not just my work, but my life.
Wow, and thank you.
My neurology really for like a decade now, and so it's incredibly meaningful to be here with you. And I'm just kind of having a moment of having this experience, enriching it a bit as well. Deeply grateful to you and the contribution that you've made. And and I think you're exactly right. I've come to use this term full spectrum abundance. The whole thing is amplified from beauty to the horror and to the complexity of it all is really alive for us right now. And so potent times to be having conversations like this for sure.
Yeah. It's funny. I was just reading a little appreciation of Suzuki Roshi in an issue of a recent issue of Buddha Dharma magazine, which is really one of my favorite Buddhist magazines because it's so much about practice and the depth of practice. Anyway, and he starts out by talking about how we sit in a lotus with our right foot over our left leg and vice versa. And then in his wonderful Suzuki Roshi way, he went from there to how it is not two and not one. And in that posture, we get confused, like, where's my left foot? Where's my right foot? Well, it's switched, right? And it goes into, well, it's one, but yet it's not just one. There is distinction. So it's not two and not one. And I think about that a little bit in terms of this time recently, and just the depth of that we are not two, nor are we one. We're both, really. We're both two and one. And so we're individuals deeply intertwined so that what happens in Kenosha, Wisconsin, for better or worse, is now rippling through our lives right here. I live amidst California wildfires. I have someone I know lost her home just in the last week in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it's very real, so the things we do, ejecting carbon into the sky, it doesn't go anywhere, and we're inheriting the consequences now, generations now and generations to come. So both those together, not two, not one, the two truths side by side of interdependence and individuality. And here we are in the middle of them.
Indeed. And in the Hindu tradition, there's also this mantra, Achinta Beda Abeda Tattva, which basically means the same thing, that the nature of reality is inconceivably plurality and union at the exact same time. And I'm here in the Tahoe Basin, actually, not too far from you.
Yeah.
it's this gorgeous, exquisite slice of heaven. I think what Mark Twain said had a lot to say about, if you want to breathe the angel's breath, go to Lake Tahoe. We've been on red flag alerts all week with these dry lightning storms.
Yeah.
That no rain, but like the lightning could touch down on this, beautiful forest floor that is filled with dry pine needles.
Yes.
It's this, there's this duality to it of like both the wonder and horrors are kind of ever present. And I think that's metaphor for the larger context that we're speaking to as well.
I think so. It's really great. We just went for it. Boom, unrehearsed, right? The big frame. So now let's come in. And think about your book in a way, and I'm gonna super simplify it, hopefully not too injuriously. That in a sense, we have these two truths side by side here. So there's the truth, let's say, of my raw emotions, my strong reactions, let's say, to the other, whoever that other is, a talking head on television, someone that I care deeply about, there's someone I live with, perhaps. There's reactions to the other. And your book explores in a lot of ways how to honor both truths, how to honor the truth of the, there are two, there's me and there's you, and also to honor the truth that we're really connected and what I do to you affects me. So I wonder if you could just explore and unpack some of the key themes from your book, particularly practical wisdom for this time.
Sure. So, I mean, my jam, if you will, is really emotions. And I really think that emotions, the way that we naturally feel, the involuntary reactions that we experience and how we work with them are really at the heart of the whole thing. And I mean, it's kind of, I was sitting down to talk to you and I was kind of appreciating the duality again of, how your work really focuses in and homes in this very useful and unique way on our positive emotions, and how that opens a doorway to coping with negative emotions. I think I come in through the opposite door, the inverse door of our negative emotions actually being an invitation to compassion as well. And so mindful of all of those reactions, and then what's really in our control is how we respond to those reactions. And that's kind of the centerpiece of the book. And of course that has that basic idea, that foundational idea has a million permutations with regards to self-love, just psychically surviving these times. Activism, certainly, if we lose sight of compassion, if we rest too long in the reactivity and all the permutations of that, no good. We will stop being able to see clearly. Our actions will be filled with the energy of animosity, and we will go in the wrong direction. And then on into there's quite a bit about race, and about some of the experiences I had in my early social work days working in the clinical foster care system and what have you, and a bit about how all of this actually belongs in spiritual culture as well, how identity politics and spiritual culture really need to align with one another. We need to dispel this myth that spirituality doesn't have a socio-political aspect to it. It necessarily does.
Yeah. Why don't you, if you could, just for everybody, state the title of your book. It's recently been released.
Sure. Oh,
even show the cover.
I have this right here, right next to this.
Oh, you're sweet.
What do you know? Yeah. Don't tell me to relax. Emotional resilience in the age of rage, feels, and freakouts.
Right. So, can you walk us through a practical example of some kind of reaction comes up, and let's bring it down to interpersonal relationships, let's say, rather than go to the wider frame of politics, at least for a start. So let's say there's somebody in your life who you, boom, have a strong reaction to that is not relaxed, right?
Mm.
What then?
Yeah, I don't really know what you're talking about. That never happens to me, right? I've
Okay, good.
been dating for 15 years. I'm past that now.
Oh, good.
Of course, kidding. I think that happened to me just an hour ago.
Yeah.
Right, but yeah. So one approach that is heavily informed by what I practice in the therapy room with folks, and what I've been working on bringing more and more into meditation, which is parts work in internal family systems, would be to first just pause, notice the reaction. You can't make a change. You can't shift something without awareness. And so what is it like? Can you stop and just notice? What is it like? What is it like in the body? What is it like in my feelings? What sort of images start to proliferate in the mind? And then from there, how am I feeling towards the part of me that's activated right now?
Yeah.
I might have the tight in my heart or in my gut or something else. And if I ask myself, well, how do I feel towards this tightness in my chest? A whole lot of things might come up. I hate it. I'm sick of it. I want it to go away. Okay. And one thing that I've picked up from Dick Schwartz and IFS that is so useful is that's not a frozen situation. You can actually internally ask your reaction to the tightness in the chest, for example. I hate it. Okay. You can ask that part of you to just step aside for a moment. See what that opens up space for. And you might find another reaction, like I'm bored by it or rather watch Netflix. But you can also ask that reaction to step aside. And I find that doing that two times, just our initial relationship to the reaction we're having. If we ask that reactivity to step aside, even just once or twice, what that clears room for is sometimes open space, sometimes curiosity, or more of a willingness to explore it. And in the most ideal circumstances, it will open a gateway to compassion. I see that this is suffering inside of me. My anger at my partner, my jadedness about whatever, it's actually a state of suffering. And that's the skillful response to that is compassion. And if we can, in that moment, bring compassion to our own reactivity, then from there, all kinds of doors open up for healing. It's just like, it's the same thing as if another person were to respond to your suffering with compassion or empathy, or actually really listen to you for once. We have the same, and I think you probably know way more about this than me, but I know Dan Siegel talks about this a lot too, that when the relationship we have to ourselves, it lights up our neurology in a very similar way, with regards to if we were receiving that from somebody outside of us.
Yeah.
So, a little complex, but just being honest about the reaction and seeing if you can get to compassion for your own reaction is kind of.
It's funny. It's that teaching of not two and not one, or both two and one, that you're exploring the multiplicity of who you are. I visualize sometimes like the round table of King Arthur with all the characters at the table. And as the legend has it, King Arthur wanted a round table, so there was no position of precedence. It's just all the voices, all the sub-personalities, all the characters. Sometimes I imagine an inner village that is the psyche, right? So you have these different voices, different parts, different sub-personalities, like, as you know, and Richard Schwartz, internal family systems, IFS approach has it. And so it's multiple, and yet it's also unified. We're not psychotic. We're not, so radically differentiated that we're unhealthy. And I love your method. That's really great. Listen to one, step back, be with it, but listen to it so you're not identified with it. And then just see who else wants to talk. Just that. Those are the two you've said, and then maybe there are 3 and 4 if you want to be really ambitious, perhaps. But just that alone, and then bringing compassion to it all, or opening to the compassion that might naturally arise. That's really powerful.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I didn't think of it myself. And it's also, it's very similar to maybe Tara Brach's rain technique as well.
It's a more, I think it's more active in particular. I mean, you're
It,
going after particular voices. You're definitely recognizing, accepting, investigating, and not selfing, but
yeah,
RAIN. But
yeah,
yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. So what happens when a part is really strong?
Mm,
That angry part, and it says, "I hate that MF." I'm right. They are assholes. They deserve this fire and
mhm,
brimstone I'm dumping on them.
mhm.
What do you
Yeah.
do then?
Yeah, and it can be so juicy to stay in that state, right? It almost feels fun to like. I remember I was working in a restaurant once, and another server. So it was like 23 years ago. Another server was really upset, and I went to him and I was like, "Can I help you in some way?" Like he was really angry, and he stomped up the stairs to the kitchen and said, "No, I really enjoy being angry right now."
Oh
You
yeah,
know, but if we don't want to be in that state, if we can
yeah.
recognize that is not a great place to be. One thing I find so helpful, and again, taking this principle of we can offer within ourselves the exact same things that we get from other people, and it works,
Mm,
is practice reflective listening. Like a therapist might urge couples to do,
mm,
is to, before you respond, just reflect back what you hear. I do this a lot with folks dealing with inner critics, right? Okay, so the inner critic is really loud, or the really pissed off part of you is really loud right now. What are they saying? Okay, I don't like that MF. I'm really upset about this. I'm whatever. Okay, reflect that back inside yourself. Say to that part of you who's so loud right now, internally, doesn't have to be conspicuous or weird, but just let that, okay, we're really upset right now because this thing happened and we feel like it's never going to be good enough, and et cetera, et cetera. And something about that inner reflective listening, I mean, we're all just longing to feel heard. We're all longing to know that just somebody is with us
mm,
in the struggle, in the heat of it all. That's the primary thing that we're all hankering after in those moments, whether we know it consciously or not. And
mm,
to do that internally, to let an emotional part of you know, I'm right here with you. I understand.
mm.
Very different than like that energy flooding the body and we're off to the races reacting. Very, very different. Yeah.
So here I want to nudge a little bit. I'm delighted by and also intrigued by what you're saying, in
Sure.
that when I think of the title of your book,
Mhm.
and I've read some of your other materials around it.
Mhm.
It's like, which part of the truth to emphasize? It seems like, when I hear the phrase, "Don't tell me to relax,"
Mhm.
in other words, what comes up for me, at least, about that is, don't delegitimize my reaction here. Don't try to get me to be all nice because you're uncomfortable with my intensity. I'm
Mhm.
intense for a damn good reason, or
Mhm.
something or other. And I
Mhm.
want to be really clear. I'm a fairly mellow guy, although definitely I've learned I have a temper, so I've had to manage that. But anyway, so yeah, really. Anyway, and I appreciate in the Tibetan frame, the deities. These are wrathful deities.
Mhm.
They're deities. They're for us in some fundamental sense, but who can also be wrathful. So, some of what you're saying about disidentify from the angry part, listen to it, bring compassion to it, listen to other parts. It could be understood as a sort of way, as a fancy way, to bypass some of that wrathful energy in
Mhm.
ourselves and other people. And I
Mhm.
know that's not really your intention here. So I
Mhm.
wondered if I could kind of nudge more into, yeah, but what about the fiery? What about the don't tell me to relax? Why'd you pick that title? And how can we honor and legitimize our wrathful reactions to things while also eventually coming to the soft landing that you opened up talking about?
Sure. Sure. So yes, you've got it.
I'm messing with you, Ralph, but hopefully to a good purpose.
Yeah, no, and you've got it just right. You've got it just right because the title of the book really means "Don't tell me how I should feel." You know, one of the things I say in the introduction is there's this terrible irony that happens a lot, where we're upset, we're enraged about injustice, about harm and atrocity, and then people will get upset with us because we're upset,
Yeah.
rather than seeing the harm and atrocity that we are reacting to.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think anger can be incredibly useful. We just have to, it's a fire though. And I mean, here we are, wildfire season, right? Like it could do a lot of damage, you know? So conscious anger, marrying compassion with anger is the ideal thing. But there are times when we're going to slip. Yesterday, I will own this and humanize myself right now. Yesterday, I was lost in the anger and reactivity, and I cried in bed, just in response to the events unfolding in Wisconsin. I'm so sick of seeing this. I'm so sick of seeing the pain of Black people not only amplified but just on display. And then it's a cause for a little while, but then the trend fades, and then we're back in the same. Just, so heartbreaking. I think that there are times when you just have to let it be. But with anger, especially, if we are intoxicated by it, if there's the cognitive fusion, or in IFS we call it blending, right? Here's me, I get angry.
Yeah.
Now that's the only thing that's happening. It's the only game in town. I can't see outside of that tunnel vision.
Yeah.
That is a tricky situation. One of my first teachers, Ethan Nickturn, actually, I come back to this over and over again, that, you know, there's this paradox of our practice is centered on present moment awareness. But oftentimes, what it takes to maintain a present moment awareness is looking back to the mistakes you've made and figuring out how you can do better in the future too. So there's no perfect formula, if that makes sense.
If you're mad about something, let's say you feel mistreated by somebody, provoked, discounted, dismissed, disrespected, betrayed, let down, flabbergasted. Some of these words have got to ring some bells. And then they say to you, basically, you shouldn't be so angry, either because you also made mistakes, you mistreated me, or whatever I did, it wasn't so bad. Okay, pretty common situation. You know, so what do you do then?
Well, I mean, it's really case by case.
Yeah.
Right. Can I, you know, somebody has a legitimate complaint with me. That's very different than.
No, you're mad at them and they tell you that you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
They want you to relax. What do you do?
Yeah. Me personally, I pause.
Okay.
I take a break. I'm sitting with this. I need a minute. Can I text you back tomorrow? Can I go to the restroom?
That's a good one.
You know, when I worked in
there are many refuges.
Yes. Yeah. For me personally though, I'm a trauma survivor. And while there's been a tremendous amount of healing in my life, like my to react, my ability to cause harm is pretty significant if I'm not watchful. So I have to leave the conversation for a minute if I'm not fired up, or if somebody's being that confrontational with me, you know. But also, I'll say this as well. I've grown incredibly comfortable with saying no and setting a boundary in my relationships. And if somebody doesn't like it, and I know I've checked my heart, I've checked myself, I've questioned, I've maybe bounced it off a couple of trusted friends, what's going on. and that person and I need to part ways for a little while, or even permanently, I've grown accepting. I mean, my very first teacher, Buddhist teacher, Vinny Ferraro, used to say, just because you don't kick somebody out of your heart doesn't mean that you let them back into your house.
Mm-hmm.
Don't stop loving them, but like sometimes love means we're done here. I'm out for a while.
Yeah.
And that's another big chapter in the book as well, is saying no, setting boundaries, and how to approach those kinds of conversations with kindness.
In a way, to me, and I want to tip my hat to you, gives your work a certain traction and rootedness and credibility, is that it goes beyond the homilies of just be nice to each other, because you're someone who really has explored, the intense passions, and including, we use the word, it's just a word, the negative emotions of especially anger, maybe some others as well. And because you're very prepared to go there, and you're okay, you're at peace in your house, and you know what I mean, you know who you live with, and you may have your preferences, but you accept your roommates, including the angry ones.
Yeah.
And because of that, that it makes it really credible when you do talk about recognizing the costs of anger and having a process of managing it.
Right. As opposed to the static paradigm of we even talk like that, right? I'm angry. That's that trance of identification that we can slip into. But I mean, make no mistake, it's been said that suffering is the harbinger of enlightenment. And this is what we're in the realm of, is can our reactivity give rise, be like a mindfulness bell. I am freaking out. I need to excuse myself from this conversation. I am trapped in suffering. I am trapped in my grief, my sorrow, my heartache for it all. Can I practice self-compassion in that moment? And in this way, these sorts of situations like you're describing can be fuel to raise our awareness and to make different choices in the face of it.
One of the things that I explored in my book, that came, Neurodharma, the part about was research on anger. And it's really interesting. I mean, we know intuitively that of the 4 so-called major categories of negative emotions, sadness, fear, shame, and anger, and they're on a range, mild to intense. Anger, people don't like feeling sad or anxious or inadequate, ashamed. But when that first rush of anger comes, boy, do we like it. The Buddhist, it was actually from, I think, U Pandita, he said that anger with its honeyed tip and poisoned barb. And so, and in the brain, interestingly, you may know this already, when we get angry, it tends to involve releases of both norepinephrine, increased norepinephrine activity, a neurotransmitter involved with getting energized and oriented and alert and prioritizing. This is salient. This really matters, right? Norepinephrine. We like norepinephrine. It's like there's a kind of brightening of the mind in a way. And also dopamine. There's a reward quality to it. It's like the rush of anger. And so therefore, we need to be especially careful with anger. And in particular, if we add righteousness to it, my good friend, righteousness, where you just know you're right. And you have a case about your grievances and why they're true and they're real, So all that, I saw a comment come in as we were talking here. From a Buddhist perspective, I'm reading the comment, anger is one of the 3 poisons. And definitely, or in the earlier metaphor, it's one of the 3 primary fuels of the fires of suffering: anger, greed, and delusion, broadly defined. And so, for me, when I learned about that and the ways in which that rush of anger can feel good and really sweep us away, it led me to be more careful about it. Be more careful about it.
Indeed.
And it's the one that's the most consequential interpersonally. It tends to have the most impact on relationships. You tell me, you feel anxious around me, I can hear that. You feel sad around me, I can hear that. You feel hurt around me, I can hear that. You feel like I'm devaluing you, I can hear that. But if you're pissed off at me, a lot harder to hear, right?
It is, but I mean, from a psychological perspective, and I'll just add to that part of my hypothesis is that part of the reason why anger is so juicy and has that feel good norepinephrine and dopamine eliciting sort of nature to it is also that in that moment we're eliminating our sense of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if we can then feel like the right one in a situation. We have left the ground of riskiness and tenderness and vulnerability, and we have sufficiently armored ourselves. And we are, yes, anger is one of the 3 poisons. We're also hardwired for it. It's not going anywhere. So the only answer we're left with then is to work on a relationship to it and how we can meet it. And I think that vulnerability piece too is important, because in an interpersonal sphere, right? If I'm angry at my partner, what are the and I go to express it, what the choice of words that I'm going to use, the choice of actions that I'm going to use is actually 99.9% of the time is going to be aimed at that person's vulnerability. You never do the dishes. You're never there for me. You never hear me, right? And then that person then feels vulnerable, and they're hardwired to defend against vulnerability. So they're get angry and go to the place where they don't feel vulnerable too. And then what they're going to do is they're going to attack my vulnerable parts. Maybe say something they don't mean, or do something else that kind of makes me wrong and therefore vulnerable. And then it's the worst game of tennis on the planet, really. Just the ball bouncing back and forth and everybody wanting to be right. Yeah. But as they say, all tennis matches end when just one person refuses to return the serve.
What do you do with people who are angry with you and you believe it's unjust?
Yeah. Depends on the context. Because that belief, my first reaction will 100% of the time be, no, that's not true. No, that you don't know. You're missing something, right? There's actually been some studies on disagreements, and they've found that when somebody disagrees with us, we think one of 2 things, something that lands in one of 2 categories, which is either you don't have all the information, like I have all the information, and if you had all the information like I had all the information, you would agree with me, or there's something wrong with you. There's just something fundamentally wrong with you. And so I am subject to that habitual reaction as well. And so I've learned to stay with it for a minute, even if I truly believe it's unjust, because tomorrow I might be willing to see that this person has a point, that they're responding to something that, just like me, their emotions follow a certain logic. It might not be my logic, but there's a logic to our emotions. They're always reacting to something. And so this person isn't reacting to nothing. They're not just, flawed, but yeah, it really depends, because there are a new practice in my life is just letting some negative comments on social media come at me, and I click like, and I keep it moving. I'm not going to deposit much more of my energy battling with people online anymore. So it's completely contextual. But this is also our practice, right? Is our practice is learning how to meet what arises in each moment with skill and with love. And, over and over again, we have the opportunity to work on that.
Yeah, I know we're going to be finishing in just a little bit, and I'm reflecting on my own journey with anger because in my family, the way I would put it is my parents had a monopoly on anger or expressed anger, right?
Ah,
It was their monopoly. The kids didn't get to have that,
mm,
and so for me, I just shoved it all down. And remarkably, actually, when I started doing deep tissue body work, getting Rolfed, this was in
mm,
my early 20s, I was really afraid that what would come boiling out was all this repressed rage. And in fact, what came boiling out was all this repressed love. I had suppressed my love and withheld it in my struggles with my parents, which was really interesting that that's what was withheld. And of course, when love gets bottled up, it can go rancid, and it's a burden and a wound. I think a lot of what makes people sorrow and suffer is unexpressed love or unchanneled opportunities to contribute. You know, point one, but point two, I'll tell you another little thing, which is that I
please.
literally had to do workshops in my early 20s. This is the human potential movement in the mid 70s. I have a few years on you, Ralph, I think. And it was a wild, great time. Boy, we did all kinds of stuff. So I took workshops where like psychodrama, we dramatized anger. And I had to practice being angry to be able to experience and express the full range 0 to 10,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And interestingly, I had to know that I could do that and I
Mm,
could tap into that wellspring, that wrathful and yet positive energy. It's not where we want to finish, but it's definitely useful sometimes to include it in where we begin. Because I'd rather, as a therapist, probably like you too, have someone who's angry than someone who's depressed. Rather, in the sense of it's easier to work with for them, because there's energy there, and often sometimes the process with someone who's depressed is helping them to become angry,
mm-hmm.
right? Because then you have energy, all this. So I had to practice it, but then after a while, maybe a little bit like people who get a black belt in some martial art, when you can go all the way, you don't have to.
Mm,
Yeah. So I
yeah.
wondered if you had a take about that.
Yeah. I really love that. Actually, kind of getting your neural pathways to be able to respond to the
Yeah.
critical mass of anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I mean, for me too, it's also how we apply that energy, right? Because anger can be incredibly useful too. I
Yeah.
think I think that protesting is natural to us.
That's right. Well, there's a lot of, it's great. Exactly. The developmental psychology, this may take you, all of us back to grad school, but anywhere or not, but the protest phase of rapprochement. In other
Ah,
words, when we reconnect with caregivers, when we're 2 years old and got dropped off at daycare, and now dad or mom's coming to pick us up again, and there's like, but that's a stage.
mm,
Protest is a stage toward
yes.
reconciliation and rapprochement. Kind of wild, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm taking your point. Keep
No,
going.
I love this. No, it's really true. This is a little bit the terrible twos, right? We've
Yeah.
got a future society on our hands that hasn't made it
Mm,
easy for all of us to exist,
yeah.
and so we need to reach a particular developmental milestone as
Mm, yeah.
well. I think,
Protest. Yeah.
yeah.
Protest is so important. You think about bottled up protest. I mean, in my family, my parents were loving and decent people, but in their culture, children were to be seen and not heard, especially they were not to be heard protesting.
Mm,
Adults had a monopoly on protest. They got to protest about the behavior of their kids, but the kids were not allowed to protest about the
yeah.
behavior of their parents. And even when they started to protest about the behavior of each other as kids, that also was squelched. So yes, protest, which obviously has large social implications these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, look at what just happened in we
Mm.
could actually transpose in a way what you're talking about is sort of a metaphor also for what's happening in sports right now. 4 years to the day that that Colin Kaepernick
Wow.
his career for taking a knee. We have this massive walkout across 3 major sports organizations.
Yeah.
You could have, I see, now I'm getting worked up. But
Good.
they could have listened the first time. You know,
Yeah.
how hard would it be to listen
Yeah.
to and to honor the protesters out there? I don't condone rioting or looting or any of these harmful practices, but the basic impetus itself is actually, there's truth to it, there's logic to it, there's real experiences that are being reacted to, and real needs being expressed. And
Mm-hmm.
instead of just listening and allowing that protest and saying, you
Mm.
guys are really upset, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Instead of listening, what do? They just, they only the parents get to be angry. The federal troops go in to squash the whole thing.
Yeah. That's a very interesting way to understand it. And I want to call out Margaret Mahler for those geeks like me who are interested in this sort of stuff, who really developed this notion of the stages of rapprochement, these normal developmental stages, and healthy ways of managing them with toddlers and preschoolers, and unhealthy outcomes when they're not managed well. And I think there's actually, I've never thought of this before, Ralph. This could be maybe your next book, but to apply, basically healthy and to look at the current moment politically through the lens of what are healthy ways of managing protest from in young children, and unskillful, unhealthy ways of responding to the protests of young children, and then the problematic consequences of that. That would be a very interesting way of looking at the current moment politically.
It's like fractals. It really is. It's just like concentric circles of the same dynamics, whether it's internal at the granular level, even, all the way out to interpersonal, all the way out to societal, all the way out to global.
Yeah. We have to receive the protest, right? And that's really a whole other interesting topic. We could talk at length. I know we're going long here. I'm going to wrap it up in just a bit here, but how to manage how to receive the anger of others, including anger maybe that's messy and it's got accusations in it that you think are not really true, but to be able to stay in place, to receive the protest of another person, protesting about you personally maybe, or protesting about other things that maybe you're implicated in because you have privileges, because you're part of a group that's been oppressive and all the rest of that, to be able to stay in place, just like I don't want to overdo this metaphor, but I'm really struck by it. The good enough parent, a skillful, competent parent who can manage the intensity and sometimes the over the topness without delegitimizing it and invalidating it, and staying in place and staying in relationship with it, and finding what's actually important and valid and appropriate, and then shifting sometimes to realize, oh, wow, I'm so sorry. You're totally right. I'll never do that again.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a jaw dropper when you're mad at someone and they go, whoa, you're right. I'm never going to do that again. They're your new best friend.
Yeah. That's refusing to return the serve. It's a version of how we can do that.
Right? Yeah. To receive the protest skillfully, and how that works, and how we need to resource ourselves to be able to stay in place with someone, particularly when you feel that some of the heat that's coming at you is unjustified. That's especially when it's important to be able to stay in place.
To be able to stay in place with that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Such as, one thing I say very clearly in the book is we all have racism in us. We all have misogyny in us. All the xenophobia, all the permutations of it live within us. We need to stop being afraid of admitting that and just say, case closed. No, it lives in me. But so often the reaction is, what are you saying? I'm a racist? And there's that vulnerable place that then we are compelled to defend against, and then the cycle just continues. The samsara just continues.
Yeah, I think of these phrases from psychology, like distance in the service of attachment. So sometimes we have to back up from someone to stay related, because maybe they're so intense. Like you said, hey, I've got to talk to you tomorrow.
Mhm.
That's in the service, though, of staying connected. It's not a cutoff. You're not exiling them and so forth. In
Right.
much the same way, protest is a necessary step
Mm.
toward reconciliation or rapprochement, to use Mahler's phrase, or to repair, to
Yeah.
rejoining, to reconnecting, right? Protest seen as a necessary stage toward reconciliation. And then skillful ways of making protest and skillful ways of receiving protest, including receiving not so skillful protest, right? These are all in the service of making things better. Well, this is
Right.
really quite profound, Ralph.
I mean, I'm really enjoying, yeah, we're kind of opening up a field of discovery here of how all
Yeah.
these models and experiences that are so burgeoning
Yeah.
and present.
Yeah. I want to kind of repair a little bit related to some comments that have come in through the chat from Hope here. And I follow you. Basically, Hope writes, I don't love the language TBH, to be honest. It makes the protester, at least in that moment, the child and the receiver, the adult. I totally want to be really clear about that. Very often, I think actually it's the protesters who are the adults in the system who
Mhm.
are saying to those they're protesting against, hey, you need to fill in the blank, raise your game, walk a higher road, regulate your own behavior, quit being, frankly, such a jerk, quit being horrible in terms of terrible forms of racism and oppression. So in many ways, it's the protester who is the adult. But I think there's something that's deeply interesting about our social mammalian nature in which we evolved, living in small bands, ways to regulate injustice and hurt and mistreatment that did not blow the band apart of people who lived together in hunter-gatherer bands for their whole lives with 40 or so people. That was it. And so I'm just thinking suddenly about ways of understanding larger scale social processes through the lens of these evolved mechanisms that have enabled us to manage disagreements and mistreatments and wounds that are very real, very real. So that's just kind of what I'm riffing on here.
Yeah, and I would love to clarify as well that I'm identifying our society as the child, as the
Yeah.
one that needs
Yeah.
to grow up,
Yeah.
and recognize the complexity of our society, and that
Yeah.
sanity ought to and inclusion ought to prevail.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you, Hope, for making this point, because the words can be framed, the connotations of them very understandably. So I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
build on what you said, Ralph, it's our society that's the beloved but wayward child.
And you referenced Winnicott's good enough parent concept, which I absolutely adore. One of my key understandings, or how I understand one of the key points of good enough parenting is the repair is really about modeling to a child how challenges can become opportunities, how we can turn adversity into strengths. That way when the good enough parent drops the ball and messes up themselves, the kid knows, what to do with that, because it's valuable. And I think that something we could connect some dots to what's happening in our society as well. We have this discord, but it's an opportunity for growth as well.
Yeah. I think maybe as we finish here, and I'm appreciating some of the many comments that have come in, many of them quite personal to me and very touching, which I'm just grateful for. I've thought of doing a workshop. Buddhist aggressiveness is not an oxymoron, something like that. It's like a weird title. The idea being that it's so important to include fieriness and intensity. And I've just really had an interesting time exploring that recently. How do we include things like intensity or outrage without the longing for justice becoming a craving for vengeance?
Yeah.
Right? How do we actually do that? And this is so much about that. And one of the things I'm taking away from talking with you, Ralph, you are the bomb in a good way. I wish we had talked more. Anyway, it's that one thing that's critically important that promotes a healthy process. When you have good process, whether it's the level of a parent and a child, two adult couples, or society altogether,
Mm.
When you have good process, you're going to usually end up with a good result. But if you
Mm.
don't have good process, you're not going to end up with a good product with good results. So how do you improve process, right? And we're exploring how to improve process when protest is in the mix, when outrage is in the mix, intensity, fury, people have had it, right? What do you do then? And it's so important to be able to support good process to receive the protests of others and the intensity of others, which rarely comes at us initially in a nice nonviolent communication package. It's usually a mess when it comes over the net, to use your tennis metaphor. And to be able to support good process and keep the volley going to a good soft landing, to a good result, right? With a beautiful dance even along the way. To be able to do that, we've got to receive the intensity of what they're hitting over. And one thing that really helps us receive the intensity of others, as you teach, is to become more at peace and skillful with the intensity arising within ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way to tie it all together. And really, you filled in some of the blanks, I think, that were maybe missing in my exposition of these ideas.
That's
But
great.
no, very, very
Yeah.
grateful to discuss these things with you.
Yeah. Ditto.
I'm
Hey,
loving it.
Ralph.
And sad that
So everybody should get your book. Don't tell me to relax.
All this and more when you pick up this bad boy right here.
That's great. And people can learn more about you, Ralph, at your website. We'll put that in the notes for this when it posts, eventually to YouTube and so on. But yeah, what's your website?
Great. Just ralphdelarosa.com.
Great.
And Ralph De La Rosa on Instagram.
Yeah.
If anybody ever wants a dose of my very strange humor, I also do an Instagram account called Spiritual Bowie Memes. It's all David Bowie and extracting.
Oh, he was something. He was something unique. Yeah, David Bowie. Yeah,
Indeed.
pretty great. Great. Well, Ralph, again, thank you. And thanks to all those who are participating, including those who sent in chats and so forth. And may you all really stay safe and well. And Ralph, is there maybe a last almost benediction, blessing, comment you'd like to offer here?
I just hope we all keep going, that no matter what, that we just don't give up, and that we just, no matter what happens, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. We don't have to wait till we're not afraid or not angry, or we don't have to wait till it's more comfortable. We just have to keep taking steps, and we'll eventually arrive in a place where our intentions are fulfilled. So we all keep going in our personal paths and in our interpersonal and societal paths as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for being you. I mean, it sounds so corny, but it's really true, Ralph. Thank you for being you. You occupy a very special and unique place, kind of in the pantheon of teachers. And I want to really appreciate you.
For better or worse.
No, that's good.
Right.
It's better.
Without the heel steps, I don't know if I would be in this place, to be honest with you. You've really given us a gift with that method. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
All gratitude is certainly returned.
Yeah. Well, take good care, everybody. And just like Ralph said, may we all keep going. Bye-bye.
Bye now.